Hey everyone, in this video I'm going to go over an Excel test that I wrote a few years ago. I designed it for an accounts payable person that was going to be working in our company that needed to know a fair bit of Excel, like I'd say intermediate slash advanced. And so the purpose of this test was to see what we thought were key parts of Excel that they would need to know, from lookups to pivot tables to parsing data. So it starts off easy and progresses to be more and more difficult. The time allotted that I would normally set aside for this was about half an hour. And I mean, maybe only one person out of the maybe dozen or so that we tested was able to finish within that time. So if you're doing an Excel test, or if you're preparing for an Excel test, or if you just want to see how you do on a test, then feel free to download this test. I'll put a link in the description, and yeah, just see how you do. And I'll go over questions and what I was expecting. So I'll start with page 1 here, and page 1 is fairly straightforward. Question 1 is just saying, using the formulas, fill in columns D, E, and F to determine the total invoice price. So here we've got a customer field, we've got a price per item, the number of items purchased. So this is really just a simple multiplication, just to see if you know how to, just do simple arithmetic in Excel. So just start with typing in equals, selecting the price per item, multiplying it by the number of items purchased, and enter. Then I can just copy this all the way down. Then a 5% tax rate. So what I can do is just type equals times 0.05. Again, just straight arithmetic here. The invoice total, again, I'm just going to be adding these, and you could do a sum formula, it really doesn't matter. Okay, and so there I've done question 1. Question 2 says to use a formula to compute the average, maximum, minimum of the invoice totals from column F here. So this is just to see if you've used these formulas before. So average, max, and min. So this is pretty straightforward. All you really need to know is what these functions are, how to pull them, and how they work. So questions 1 and 2, pretty straightforward. I'd say I'd wager most people would agree this is probably pretty beginner stuff in Excel. I'm going to go to page 2. This is to do with VLOOKUPs. So I'd say this falls into a threshold of somewhere between the end of the beginner level, somewhere around, or the beginning of intermediate. So sort of that cutoff there. VLOOKUP is just so common. It's hard to imagine, doing a position that involved in Excel where you wouldn't have to do a lookup. So it's a pretty crucial formula that you want to be familiar with. So in the first example, I'm going to be looking up this customer in this table. So I want to see which city the customer is located in. So if I just type in VLOOKUP, I'm going to select the customer as my lookup value. Then the table, I can just select this. The index number, I'm pulling from the second column, and I'm looking for an exact match, so I can type in false or enter 0. And it tells me that customer B is located in Chicago. Okay, question 4 is still using a VLOOKUP, except this time I'm looking for an approximate match. So basically all I'm doing is changing that last argument from false to true to say that I want the closest match. And this is particularly important if you're dealing with something like tax rates, because you want the closest without going over. So in this example, let's say $12,000 in income, that's going to get the lowest tax bracket of 15%. So I cannot do an exact match, otherwise I'll get an error here. So I use the VLOOKUP, I select 12,000, and again I'm going to select this table here. The column index, I'm going to put number 2 because I'm still pulling from the second column. And this time the range lookup I'm setting to true because I do want an approximate match. And now it tells me that 12,000 relates to 0.15, and I can convert this into percentages, but it doesn't matter. And again, I can do the same thing if I just copy this formula down. The one thing I will want to do, and this also tests, I guess I could have done this in the above example as well, but to see if you know how to freeze cells, that's another thing that you can also show that you know how to do by putting that in here. Because if you just straight copy this down, then might not get the results that you expect. So freezing cells you always want to do anytime you're copying formulas down, just to make sure that they're consistent, especially when you have a certain range that you need fixed. So just quickly to check over, so $50,000 would have fallen in this tax bracket, 22%, because it hasn't quite reached the threshold of $87,000, and $150,000 would put you in the highest tax bracket of 29%. So really the only difference between this formula and this one is just the last argument. Here I'm using false, here I'm using true. The reason I use this question 4 is because I find that a lot of people use VLOOKUP for exact matches, and I just want to see if people know how to use approximate ones. On to page 3 now. So this is going to be using question 5 is an if statement. So create an if statement in column G for each customer, and the if statement should check if an invoice total is more than $100, and if it is, make the cell in column G in X, in column G, in X, otherwise leave it blank. So this is a fairly straightforward if function, an if formula. So my logical test here is I'm setting, if this is greater than 100, then I'm setting it to an X, otherwise blank. So I can just copy this all the way down, and so it correctly flags these two invoices as being over $100. So I know that that's working correctly. Section B says to create a formula to calculate the total of all the invoices if the total is more than $100. So you could do a sum if here using the $100, but I put this question purposely below just to make it easy, so you can just do the sum if using the X. So sum if range X, and then sum this range. So again, you could have done this multiple ways. There's usually not just one way to do a formula in Excel anyways, but the point is being able to know how to do a sum if formula, because sum if is also another pretty commonly used function in Excel, so you want to be able to make sure you're familiar with that. Question 6 says to create a pivot table and insert it at cell I19. And so what I can do here is just select this table, hit insert pivot table. This is really not terribly difficult. I'm just going to select I19, hit OK, and then it says to summarize the total invoices by customer. So if I put customer invoice total, so that's all I'd be really looking for, is someone just to be able to know how to create a pivot table and then how to put the fields in. Anytime you're, especially in finance, I mean, pivot tables are pretty common, so this is again a pretty essential skill that you should be familiar with if you're looking to go into similar roles. The next part B, was to create a calculated field that divides the invoice by the items purchased. So a calculated field, just go here, and let's say I'm just going to call this invoices divided by items purchased. Name really doesn't matter here. It wasn't really anything tricky. I mean, I'm just saying to take the invoice total and divide it by the items. So invoice total divided by the items purchased. Hit OK. The point is really just to see if someone knows how to create a calculator field in a pivot table. So not too advanced. I think this is more the intermediate stage. I mean, definitely if you know how to use an if statement, you're definitely, I would say, in the intermediate stage for sure. So on to page 4, which is the more challenging question here. The first part is actually just to sort these names in ascending order, which this is still pretty simple, but I just wanted to throw it in there. So A to Z, my list was already sorted, but in the test I think I had this more jumbled up. But anyways, just to see if you know how to sort it. And then section B, this is the challenging one. In column A, the names are last name, comma, first name. And now using a formula in column B, change it so that our first name space last name. So for example, change the name Smith, comma John to John Smith. So this is not a terribly easy thing to do, especially if you just want to put it in one formula, because it requires, you know, using either the mid, left, right formulas and then combining them all together in one cell. So it's a bit challenging. What one person did was they did text to columns. So for instance, if I copy this over here, I'll show you text to columns, and then you just use the limited, comma, right, and then you can concatenate them. This was not what I was looking for. I was looking for someone to put in an actual formula, but this is just an example of how you could do it multiple ways. But you know, if you don't always have space to be able to do this, and that's why I wanted to see people who could do it in a formula, because the other disadvantage of doing text to columns is, you know, if you add more items to this list, you're always going to have to repeat the text to columns. Whereas within a formula, you just set it and forget it. You can just add more names and it doesn't matter. The formula will automatically convert it. Whereas text to columns, you're going to have to either do a macro or repeat that process all the time. So it's not ideal. So I'll show you how you could go about doing this. So the first thing is I want to grab the first name. So I know the first name is at the end here after the comma. So what I can do is I can use the right function, select the text, and the key thing is the number of characters. So it's the right function is counting from the right. So the tricky part here is calculating how many number of characters you want to pull. So I'm going to use the len function, which tells me the length of this cell, and then I'm going to subtract where the comma is, because the comma is a key part of this cell to cut off between where the first name, where the last name ends and the first name starts. So I'm going to use the find function to say I want to find the comma within here, start at position 1. So right now I've got it so that the length of the function is going to subtract the position here, and I'm still going to need to subtract one item because I don't want to include the comma itself. So let's take a look at what this formula looks like right now. So it gives me Thomas, and I want to double check to make sure I've got just everything and that I don't have an empty space after Thomas. So what I can do is use right and then just close this. So I want to make sure, see, the S is at the end. That tells me there's not an extra blank in there. So that's working how I expected. So if I copy this down, you can see that it's correctly pulling the first name. Now that's just part of it. So I want to add the last name. And now you can use concatenate. I always prefer using the ampersand just because, well, it's less typing for one thing, and it works the same way. So I'm just adding a blank there to put that space between the first name and the last name. And now to pull the last name is actually easier because the last name is right at the start before the comma. So here I can use the left function. So I'll select the text, and then I'm going to select for the number of characters. I'm going to find, again, I want to find the comma within this string, start at position 1. And again, I want to subtract number 1 because I do not want to actually include the comma in my results. And there we go, I got Thomas Anderson. And now again, I'll check right, make sure it ends in an N. Yep, there's no extra trailing space. Copy this down, and now I've got my names in first name space last name as opposed to last name comma first name. So again, the main advantage of this is if I added another person's name, you know, Jones comma Greg, let's say, you know, the formula does it for me. You know, if I was doing text to columns, it obviously wouldn't be able to do that for me automatically unless, of course, I program a macro. So the main advantages here is, you know, can you build this type of formula? Now, the right and the left functions, you could have also used the mid function. That one you can specify. That one's a bit more, it can be a bit trickier, but it works similarly. So the key is just whether you know how to build this formula, because parsing out information out of Excel is extremely valuable because a lot of times it's not going to be in the format that you need it to be. So it's incredibly useful to do this, and I guarantee the the majority of people, especially that you may go into an interview, might not be familiar with this. So it's an important skill, I think, to know, especially if you're looking for advanced positions that involve a lot of Excel work. So feel free to try out the test. I'll post the link in the description, and if you have any feedback, by all means let me know, either in the comments or go to my website and send me a note letting me know what you think, whether it's too easy, too hard, or if there's things that you think should have been in there that I didn't cover. But other than that, I hope you we wish you good luck if you have a test or anything like that. And yeah, thanks for watching.